Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Education in the Age of the Internet. I'm Lee Homan. I'm the Vice President for Advancement here at Evergreen. Thank you. Is everybody having a good time? So we've been at this for a couple of days now. Actually, I and my staff and many people from around campus and many volunteers have been at this for about a year. This is the 40th anniversary of the first graduating class of Evergreen. They graduated in June of 1971. There were 21 of them. Excuse me, they graduated in 1972. What year is it and where am I? That year we had 1,178 students and 21 of them were seniors, so they graduated that first year in case somebody's trying to do the math out there. The campus was scattered all over because here on campus there was some very much construction underway, but the buildings weren't ready, so there were classes all over town. There were classes in the legislative chambers, and they were in trailers out by where the child care center is now, which formerly had been a meat packing plant, for those who didn't know that. So this is a really culmination of events that we've had all year. We started with Convocation in the fall. We did an Art of Living, a staff recognition event. We did traveling seminars all over the country. We were in California several times. We were in Chicago, New York, Boston, meeting with alums from all over the country, many who have joined us here. How many people do we have here that have traveled some distance to be here? Raise your hands. Wow. Wow. So all told, we have 62 events. Beginning on Thursday evening and running through tomorrow morning, which is just a huge undertaking, and I hope you will attend as many of those as you possibly can. We also have a number of social events. I hope you'll all come to the party this evening. The beer garden will be open. We had a wine tasting last night. That was the toughest crowd I've talked to so far because they wouldn't stop talking. They didn't want to hear from me, and that was quite all right. So one of the things I want to talk about with all of you, and this is usually where I get a little bit of a groan, and it's okay. You can go ahead and groan because my job, in part, is to help raise money for the institution. Yeah. There are many of you who have joined us today who have been very generous contributors to the institution, and we certainly want to thank all of you. We hope that all of you, yes, give them a round of applause. We hope that all of you will consider giving gifts to Evergreen. This is the 40th anniversary. We're hoping that for the 40th anniversary you will at minimum think about giving $40 or a multiple of 40, particularly to the annual fund this year. We also have a very generous grant from the Gates Foundation that is matching dollar for dollar, and we're building a $3 million scholarship fund. And so we hope you will think about that either individually or collectively. I've talked to many of you who are interested in that. But the work we do in advancement is about much more than raising money. It's about engaging people. I wish that all of you could have been at the session that I just came from, where there was an incredible conversation about what engagement means in general. Dan Tishman, who will be speaking later this afternoon, gave a much more eloquent talk about that than I possibly can, and I hope that he will talk about that again this afternoon. In your packets, you will see a checkoff form that we have about the many ways that you can be engaged here at Evergreen. As we imagined this event, we had many hopes and dreams about what would come of it and that kind of engagement. I would say, being about halfway through the weekend, we have succeeded beyond our wildest dreams. And I suspect that on Monday morning, we'll all get together to have that conversation about what we will do next, and we'll realize that we bit off a really big bite. And one of the things I know for certain is we cannot do it alone. And so I really want to encourage all of you to take a look at that. There are people over at the registration desk that can talk with you about the many ways that you can be involved and engaged. I think Evergreen is one of the most engaged institutions outside of the institution once you leave in the country. I think there are ways that we can promote that from within the institution and that all of you can be a part of that. So I really want to invite you to do that. So with that, I want to turn this over to my colleague, Amanda Walker, to give an introduction to our lunch speaker.
Thank you. Thank you, Lee. And speaking of getting involved, I also want to thank our volunteers. We have over 100 volunteers helping this weekend, and about 150 people who are speaking as well, too. So that's a lot of people who are giving of their time to make this a success. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce Lynda Weinman, who graduated from Evergreen in 1976, who's going to speak on the topic of education in the age of the internet. Lynda is the co-founder and executive chair of Lyndacom, the online learning company that teaches anyone software, creative, and business skills through videos that you can watch on the web. Lynda is a self-taught computer expert, educator, entrepreneur, and author of several best-selling books. She actually wrote the very first industry book on web design called Designing Web Graphics in 1995. And before launching Lynda.com, Lynda taught at the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, and she also worked in the special effects film industry. So she's got involved in many disciplines, like every good greener. So along with her husband and co-founder, Bruce Haven, who's also here with us this afternoon, she has evolved Lynda.com from a web resource for her students to a website to order her books, to a registration hub for physical classes on web design, to its current form as an online learning company with over 1 million members. So please join me in welcoming Lynda Weinman to the stage.
Okay, have to say, that really makes you feel old. I mean, it's great to be back, and I know I'm going to talk about a topic that everyone in this room cares about, which is kind of fun to be able to talk about. I myself didn't know that I was going to grow up and become an educator and be so interested in education. Definitely my Evergreen background helps me come to that. When I was teaching myself Photoshop, I found all these pictures of my friends from Evergreen, and I made this little collage, and I don't have these pictures anymore, but Lynn Robb, Lauren Schlim, Matt Groening, Linda Berry, Brad Picorni, Jill Stewart, Connie Matheson, a bunch of people, some of whom are here today, which is really cool. Great to be back. There's a lot that Evergreen stands for. I have a lot of people who I've come across while being here have children, nieces, nephews, second-generation Evergreeners who are attending now, which is really cool. And one of my friends, who is a parent, went to the parent orientation, and she was really shocked that the tone of it was almost apologetic, like we don't offer grades and we don't have prerequisites, when she actually saw that that was one of the real strengths of the college. And I'm going to be talking today about what Evergreen represents, how education has to go beyond the walls of Evergreen and other higher education institutions, and my own personal journey and interest in education. So we all know that there are lots and lots of problems with education today. The student debt has exceeded credit card debt in America. We have the biggest number of high school dropouts ever. Unbelievable budget cuts that are happening everywhere. They're happening to Evergreen. They're happening at every public and private institution throughout the nation because of the economy. And there are no new colleges really being built, if you think about it. We have one Harvard, we have one Yale, we have one Princeton, and yes, we have one Evergreen, but more of them are not being built, and yet the need for education is growing. The population is growing, There's a global need for education beyond, even the reach of the United States. So, and there's really no sure kind of job market facing graduates today. So I wanted to share a video that was made at Kansas State University. About 200 students put this video together to explain how they were feeling about their education. And this is a collaborative project where they all collaborated and wrote the outline for it and then produced it. They used Google Docs and many collaborative online tools to create it. I was born in 1955, and that's what classrooms looked in 1955, and I think they still mostly look like that today, and yet there's been an awful lot of change in the world to maybe make it so that that shouldn't be the case. When I was growing up, I loved school. I was a straight A student until when I was about 7 years old, my parents got divorced, and I really became very depressed and completely uninterested in school. And when I was in high school, I was in junior high, I read this book called Summerhill, which really changed my entire viewpoint on what school could be. And the premise of the book, it was about a school that was in England, and the idea was that students were allowed to take whatever kind of class they wanted to take. There were no prerequisites and there were no grades. Does that sound familiar? And I so badly wanted to go to a school like this, it just kind of gave me a little bit of hope that maybe I could be interested again in things. And the premise was that if you allowed children to decide what they wanted to learn and take ownership of what they wanted to learn, pursue their own interests, that they might find their purpose and find their passion in life. And that sounded really good to me because I was feeling pretty lost. And while I was there, one of my friends went to Evergreen, and I found out about Evergreen in 1971 when it first opened, and I was here in 1972 or three. I came in 1973, and among all the other things that Evergreen meant to me, it really fortified. I went from being in a progressive high school to going to a progressive college, and I think one of the things that is typical of a lot of Evergreeners is that we learn how to be brave. We come to Evergreen scared, and we learn how to be brave here. We learn how to do things that we've never done before. We learn how to have the belief in ourselves that if we don't know how to do something, we will figure it out, and we will find our purpose and our passion. So I recently brought my nephew here, who's about to start as a second-year student, and I opened up the catalog, and I read what the expectations of an Evergreen graduate were, and I was really shocked because I've been giving a lot of talks about how education needs to change, and this has been a huge part of my message, that we have to do more than teach facts and figures, that we actually have to teach a lot of the social and critical thinking skills, these expectations, which I've summarized here, to be responsible for yourself, to learn to collaborate, to learn to communicate, demonstrate critical thinking, be aware of not only quantitative but qualitative and creative inquiry, and to demonstrate breadth and synthesis. And there it was as the core Evergreen philosophy. I think we are really going through a very different time. If we think about what's happened in the last 10 years, 10 years ago, Facebook didn't exist, Google didn't exist, Flickr, Yelp, all of these different tools that are out there, they weren't even invented yet. And I know myself as a parent, my daughter grew up at 2 years old learning how to use a mouse and how to interact with the computer, and she's the digital native and I'm the digital immigrant, and yet we are teaching digital natives. And so there's this sort of credibility gap between us and them, and there is this whole sort of us versus them really going on. And I was fortunate enough to be at a lecture at Art Center College of Design and to hear Catherine Hale speak, who is a professor and director of graduate studies in literature at Duke University. And she was talking about these two modes of learning, hyperattention and she called it deep attention. And I've included a little excerpt of her talk, but her premise was that those of us who are the digital immigrants grew up in a time where we practiced deep attention, and where, the entire idea was that you would, really think deeply about things, read long books, sit in long lectures, and that today we have a generation of people who are more hyper-attentive, and they tend to not like single streams of information. They're multitaskers, like the video that we just saw. And she cited a study that was done by the Kaiser Foundation, which talks about Generation M, you can call them the millenniums, the media generation, and that they are the practitioners, and they have, even this word ADD, it really wasn't in the vernacular as much as, 15, 20 years ago. And I think that her idea was that within this study, it showed how much media kids today, or 8 to 18-year-olds, are being exposed to, and the numbers are really pretty staggering. If you break it down, it's almost 5 minutes in TV, 3 minutes in music, an hour and a half in computers, an hour in video games, a whole 38 minutes spent reading, and that's still being considered media in this study. So we also, if we want to think about how big this generation is, this is America. In America, it's almost, a third of the, or more than a third of the population is within this new generation. And my good friend Lynn Robb, who's here today, told me that she is so frustrated with her kids spending so much time consuming media that she said to them, do you want to grow up to be a consumer or a creator? And just the importance of us all becoming creators and not just consumers. And there have been all kinds of articles and books about how the new media is kind of making us stupid, and even myself. I mean, I used to know everybody's phone number when I went to Evergreen, and yet today that's all stored in my cell phone. I don't need that part of my memory anymore. I don't use it anymore. And I think we're all in this same kind of state where we're getting so much information, we're getting it so differently that it in effect, actually is changing our brain chemistry. Little nod, Matt. But there's actual truth that with neuroplasticity, we're always adapting, we're always growing new pathways, and when you are exposed to this level of media, your attention is changing. It's not anything we can really debate or lament, it just is. And so I would like to share some of what Catherine Hale's talked about in that talk at Art Center. I have a little excerpt about what it's like to teach hyper-attentive students.
So what this means then for us as educators is that we are facing a crisis. Those of us who are old enough to be on the faculty of universities and colleges were undoubtedly raised in environments that favored deep attention. Indeed, we could scarcely have earned our degrees and succeeded in academia without learning deep attention and becoming deeply immersed in that mode of attention. So it's not surprising that my colleagues who are faculty members tend to stigmatize hyperattention and see it as a deficient mode of learning or a deficient mode of cognitive engagement. But in fact, one could argue that under certain circumstances, hyperattention is actually more adaptive than deep attention. For example, if you were an air traffic controller, you would need precisely the qualities of hyperattention, the ability to have more than one stream of information, to flexibly change your focus, and so forth. And as situations like air traffic control become more prevalent in our environment, and indeed I believe that they are, hyperattention is becoming increasingly adaptive. And yet at the same time, if we think in long, deep historical time, it's undoubtedly the case that hyperattention came first. Because to develop deep attention, you need security. You needed a society stable enough to allow one the luxury of focusing on a single object and excluding the environment, a luxury that Paleolithic people undoubtedly did not have. So it has taken us as a species centuries or millennia to be able to develop the luxury of deep attention.
I thought her perspective on that was really worth sharing. And, you know, we really are just adapting to the times. And what I like about her approach is that she's not fighting it, and she is also developing a lot of ways to teach hyperattentive students and engaging them with combining new media and literature, which is what she teaches, which definitely requires deep attention. So next I'd like to share a little video clip of an author, Mark Prinsky, who's very involved in the role that gamification and video games are, how that is affecting young people today and their ways of learning and our ways of teaching this new group of people.
And of course, the first question you could ask is, why would we even want a new vision of teaching and learning? Don't we do a good enough job today? Well, a lot of things are happening. We're not seeing eye to eye, right? The teachers often, there's one professor not from here who's quoted as saying, these laptops that the kids have, it's just like the new spitball. They sit there and they Facebook through our classes. The kids turn around and say, my teachers are illiterate technologically, and why should I be learning from somebody who's illiterate? So that's not working real well. The students are telling us that when they come into our educational establishments, compared to what they do outside, they're powering down. So if that's the case and they're shutting down their brains in order to be with us, then we are wasting all that power. And one of the things that's happened is that education and school are not the same. They're changing, they're diverging in a sense for many of our kids, especially in the earlier grades, where school is one part of their learning, but after school, or sort of another way to think of it is the formal part versus the informal part, is another huge piece of their learning. The formal part is where they get the credential, it's legacy stuff, it's old stuff, it's kind of irrelevant things. We have to push it on the kids. The after-school part is where they get their 21st century learning. That's their internet. It's their games. It's all the things that they do out of their own passion that help them learn, and that's exciting learning. Books have been...
So next I'd like to share a little bit of Sir Ken Robinson, who is a renowned author, written books about finding your passion, tapping into your own creativity, and some of his views about education today. And they're all really kind of echoing similar sentiments, but I think it's interesting to share with you, especially when I have a whole hour to talk some different perspectives on this problem.
We are developing technological innovations at the most extraordinary rate. And it means that everything is changing far faster and far more profoundly than most people really get, I think. And there are both great opportunities and great challenges and some risks in all of this. And our education systems were never designed to meet these challenges. And my argument today is that we can't really just improve them, we have to radically transform them. a lot of people, in my experience, perhaps a majority, live their lives doing things they're not really much concerned with or interested in. You know, they just get along with it, and they do it because they've wandered into it, and they wait for the weekend. I believe that a lot of people are not deliberately, but systematically prevented from finding their true talents by these processes of education, because education is preoccupied.
So we know that that's not true for Evergreeners, but it is true for the majority of people who go through the education system. And then the last person I wanted to share a completely different perspective is one of learning differences. And Temple Grandin is an advocate for Asperger's and autism, and she is an amazing example herself of a very successful autistic thought leader. And she's written books, and there was actually an HBO special about her. She's truly amazing, and I got to see her give this talk, and I think we also have to keep in mind that there are lots of learning differences.
I think I'll start out and just talk a little bit about what exactly autism is. Autism is a very big continuum that goes from very severe, the child remains nonverbal, all the way up to brilliant scientists and engineers. And I actually feel at home here because there's a lot of autism genetics here. You wouldn't have any... It's a continuum of traits. When does a nerd turn into, you know, Asperger, which is just mild autism? I mean, Einstein and Mozart and Tesla would all be probably diagnosed as autistic spectrum today. And one of the things that really is going to concern me is getting these kids to be the ones that are going to invent the next energy things, you know, that Bill Gates talked about this morning. But one of the things that really worries me is where's the younger version of those kids going today? They're not ending up in Silicon Valley where they belong. Now, one of the things I learned very early on, because I wasn't that social, is I had to sell my work and not myself. And the way I sold livestock jobs is I showed off my drawings, I showed off pictures of things. Here are the types of thinking. Photorealistic visual thinkers like me. Pattern thinkers, music and math minds. Some of these oftentimes have problems with reading. You also will see these kind of problems with kids that are dyslexic. You'll see these different kinds of minds. And then there's a verbal mind. They know every fact about everything. Together, we've got to work on developing all these different kinds of minds. And one of the things that's driving me really crazy as I travel around and I do autism meetings is I'm seeing a lot of smart, geeky, nerdy kids. And they just aren't very social. And nobody's working on developing their interest in something like science. And this brings up the whole thing of my science teacher. My science teacher is shown absolutely beautifully in the movie. I was a goofball student when I was in high school. I just didn't care at all about studying until I had Mr. Carlock's science class. He was now Dr. Carlock in the movie. And he got me challenged to figure out an optical illusion room. This brings up the whole thing of you got to show kids interesting stuff. You know, one of the things that I think maybe TED ought to do is tell all the schools about all the great lectures that are on TED. And there's all kinds of great stuff on the internet to get these kids turned on. Because I'm seeing a lot of these geeky, nerdy kids, and the teachers out in the Midwest and other parts of the country, when you get away from these tech areas, they don't know what to do with these kids. And they're not going down the right path. The thing is, you can make a mind to be more of a thinking and cognitive mind, or a mind can be wired to be more social. And what some of the research now has shown in autism is there may be extra wiring back here in the really brilliant mind, and we lose a few social circuits here. It's kind of a trade-off between thinking and social. And then you can get into the point where it's so severe, you're going to have a person that's going to be nonverbal. We've got to think about all these different kinds of minds, and we've got to absolutely work with these kind of minds, because we absolutely are going to need these kind of people in the future. What can visual thinkers do when they grow up? They can do graphic design, all kinds of stuff with computers, photography.
So I think her point is that, you know, obviously there are different, we're all different. Sir Ken Robinson, I heard him speak recently, and he said 7 billion people in the world, why would we possibly think that we should all be learning exactly the same thing and studying exactly the same things? And so as I was putting together a lot of the different talks that I give on education, it kind of hit me like thunder one day that at the exact same moment in time that all of this happened, we've been stressing standardized education in high school. And it just couldn't have happened at a worst possible moment in time to disengage an entire generation of understanding that they will have value despite being labeled bad at math or bad at reading or whatever different kinds of labels are being given to them in this standardized education world. And I wanted to also share some of the things that I think are being done in online education to counteract that, as well as in physical education, like at places like Evergreen. This term, flipped classroom, was coined by these two teachers. They're science teachers in high school. And it really is interesting because the flipped classroom model is so similar to the Evergreen model, and yet this is sort of the new buzzword in education. But the premise is that the teachers record the lectures and the students watch the lectures at home as homework and then come into class and do projects and talk to each other and debate things and showcase things, just like we do here at Evergreen. But I think this is a really nice video of how this particular teacher, Aaron Sams, turned around his classroom and flipped the idea of how he was going to teach the high school students and what happened as a result. Uh-oh. Play.
I'm Aaron Sams, and I teach science here at Woodland Park High School. My ultimate goal, I guess, as a teacher is to help students become learners who can learn for themselves and by themselves. One of the problems that I was guilty of even prior to flipping my classroom around was the classroom was centered around me. I told them exactly what to learn, how to learn it, what assignments to do to learn it, and when to learn it, and how to prove to me that they learned it. I don't do that anymore. We changed the place in which content is delivered. Instead of standing in front of a class and delivering, here's how you do this type of problem, here's how this works, I deliver that direct instruction now asynchronously at home through these videos that we make with Camtasia Studio.
Times till whole.
Oh, we didn't do that last time.
The last step, they were already whole numbers. We had 1, 1, and 4.
Yeah.
Here we don't have a whole number. So here's a few little tricks when you need to multiply by whole numbers. If one of your numbers ends in 0.5, you're going to multiply by 2.
Or something 0.5 times it by 2.
Right.
Okay, write this down, guys.
Yes. If something ends in 0.3 or 0.33 or 0.66, you multiply by 3.
And when the kids come to class, they don't show up to learn new stuff. They show up to apply the things that they learn at home and to ask me questions about the things they learned at home. So now they could have my lesson, if you will, what I would normally have stood up and lectured to them in class with some added features. They get that at home, and then what they were expected to do for homework is now what they do in my class.
And what I really loved, I was on his blog and I read this quote and I thought that this was particularly poignant, especially in light of listening to Temple Grandin right before this, that it brings the quiet students out of their shells, and that sadly some of the students rarely have adults who are going to listen to them. And really, I think what we need in this time where so much is automated and so much is computerized is we need higher touch with actually talking to each other and talking to people, and that's what's so beautiful about this particular model. And another poster child for the flipped classroom movement is Saul Kahn, who was a hedge fund trader, and he started to help his niece learn math by posting YouTube videos. He lived in California and she lived in New York, and suddenly other people started watching the YouTube videos, and eventually he built such a following that he quit his day job and he started to publish videos, and he's since published, I think, thousands of videos himself that he's created on math and all kinds of other subjects. He's recently received funding from the Gates Foundation, and he's created a back-end kind of analytics to help teachers understand how their students are doing in math. And he talked about this a little bit at TED, and I want to share some excerpts from that.
And so the paradigm is the teacher walks in every day. Every kid works at their own pace, and a teacher this is actually a live dashboard from Los Altos School District, and they look at this dashboard. Every row is a student, every column is one of those concepts. Green means the student's already proficient, blue means that they're working on it, no need to worry, red means they're stuck. And what the teacher does is literally just says, let me intervene on the red kids. Or even better, let me get one of the green kids who are already proficient in that concept to be the first line of attack and actually tutor their peer. I kind of come from a very data-centric reality, so we don't want that teacher to even go and intervene and have to ask the kid awkward questions. Oh, what do you not understand, or what do you do understand, and all of the rest. So our paradigm is to really arm the teachers with as much data as possible, really data that in almost any other field is expected if you're in finance or marketing or manufacturing, and so the teachers can actually diagnose what's wrong with the students so that they can make their interaction as productive as possible. So now the teachers know exactly what the students have been up to, how long they've been spending every day, what videos have they been watching, when did they pause the videos, what did they stop watching, what exercises are they using. What have they been focused on? The outer circle shows what the exercises they're focused on. The inner circle shows the videos they're focused on. And the data gets pretty granular, so you can actually see the exact problems that the student got right or wrong. Red is wrong, blue is right. The leftmost question is the first question that the student attempted. They watched the video right over there. And then you could see eventually they were able to get 10 in a row. It's almost like you can almost see them learning over those last 10 problems. They also got faster. The height is how long it took them. So, you know, when you talk about self-paced learning, it makes sense for everyone. You know, in education speak, differentiated learning. But it's kind of crazy what happens when you actually see it in a classroom. Because every time we've done this, in every classroom we've done, over and over again, if you go 5 days into it, there's a group of kids who've raced ahead and there's a group of kids who are a little bit slower. And in a traditional model, if you did a snapshot assessment, you say, oh, these are the gifted kids, these are the slow kids. Maybe they should be tracked differently. Maybe we should put them in different classes. But when you let every student work at their own pace, and we see it over and over and over again, you see students who took a little bit extra time on one concept or the other, but once they get through that concept, they just race ahead. And so the same kids that you thought were slow 6 weeks ago, you now would think are gifted. And we're seeing it over and over and over again. And it makes you really wonder kind of how much all of the labels, maybe a lot of us have benefited from, were really just due to a coincidence of time.
I think the
the
coincidence of time that he talks about is just so profound because we're penalizing our kids because maybe they can't learn something quickly, where it's not really it's about teaching to a test or passing a test. It's not about actually obtaining the knowledge. And I just also really love in Saul Kahn's class that he's having the slower kids help, or the faster kids help the slower kids, and just the importance of that, of learning how to help each other and collaborate and bring everybody up together. And so I think these are some examples of where technology is really improving this standardized learning experience. So I want to just switch over a little bit to Lynda.com because we do something very similar to the flipped classroom model, where we have a company and all that we do are make instructional videos that teach people 21st century skills. And these are some pictures of our offices. As Amanda said, we have 1 million people who are subscribers to our service, and we have about 300 employees and a big film production department that just does nothing but make instructional videos. And these are the different topics that we teach and some of the things that you can do with those topics. And these have really become baseline skills. Regardless of what industry you're in, you're expected to know how to do things like, you know, make a spreadsheet or be able to create a presentation or add some graphics or make a website. And so we really are more focused not so much on institutional learning, but on lifelong learning. And where we started as a company was teaching tools like, you know, Photoshop and Dreamweaver and how to do very specific things. But we've branched into some other areas where we've started to focus on creating videos that encompass skills. So instead of just showing photography software, also showing how to use a camera, how to take a picture, how to deal with lighting. And then we've also created about 30 different documentaries so far on different types of professions that you can have on various exemplars who've created greatness by choosing their passion, choosing to follow their passion, and what their journeys have looked like. And so sort of coming up with more of a holistic approach to teaching, but using the medium of video. And I wanted to, let's see, sorry, it's not advancing. Okay, just to share what some of the benefits are of that. We have created over 80,000 different videos, and Saul Kahn's created tens of thousands, and there are thousands and thousands of videos out there. I think when I was growing up and going to school, it would have never occurred to us to learn through video because there was no way to distribute it. The fact that you can make very bite-sized, searchable, to the point access, and video and audio, how Temple Grandin was talking about different kinds of learners and the importance of making richer experiences and being able to augment learning with really clear examples, visual examples, and having the ability also to make a transcript. I was thanked before the afternoon started today by somebody here at Evergreen who is works in the library and is slightly hearing impaired, and just said she's so grateful that we close caption everything and create transcripts for everything. But there's more benefit than just for hearing impaired. There's also the benefit of having transcripts be searchable and be able to really exactly find the information that you're looking for. That's one of the real benefits of something that's online. To be able to watch something over and over. I was once at a trade show and someone came up to me and said, what I love about your service is that I can watch the same movie over and over again and nobody has to know how stupid I am. and even though it sort of sounded, you know, self-deprecating, it really was an epiphany for me that there's something so important about anonymous, having safety and learning something new, that it's scary, that often the way that our school system is so competitive and it's all about people who are better than each other and getting grades, that it's really not about getting the actual knowledge. And I think for us, we haven't really gone into assessment or testing, which is probably very much from my Evergreen roots, but it just allows people to be able to learn because they want to learn something instead of being critiqued while they're learning it. And then the ability, of course, to be able to stop things, replay them, watch them again, go to a certain section, have closed captioning, double and triple up speed, and something that's straightforward. And then just the whole advantage that this is choice and this is personal. And I think that was true of all of the different examples that I showed of online learning. When we talk about synchronous versus asynchronous in the online learning space, we're having a synchronous experience. You're all listening to me talk. If you wanted to go deeper into what I'm talking about, you can't do that. You can't rewind me if you couldn't, you know, understand something or wanted to see something again. And so the whole idea of asynchronous education is very powerful, and it was never possible before the digital age. And of course, being able to access not only on computers, but there's a huge movement towards mobile and anytime, anywhere learning. So I wanted to just share 4 out of the 80,000 videos that we've created.
By photographer John Lorenz.
This one is on Photoshop.
If you look at the layers panel, you can see that that photograph is on the top layer, the trees layer. And that I have another layer below, which is currently hidden, that's filled with orange. If I make the trees layer temporarily invisible by clicking its eye icon, you can see that orange layer below. I'll make the trees layer visible again. Now, what I'd like to do is to add a layer mask to the trees layer that will hide parts of the trees layer without actually deleting anything on the trees image itself. To add a layer mask to the trees layer, I'll first make sure the trees layer is selected in the layers panel, and then I'll go down to the add layer mask icon, the icon that looks like a square with a circle in it at the bottom of the layers panel. I'll click to add a white layer mask. And this thumbnail on the right side of the trees layer represents the layer mask. A layer mask is a grayscale element. In other words, it can be only white, black, or gray. Where a layer mask is white like this, it shows or reveals everything on the layer to which it's attached. So with the layer mask white, we can still see everything that's on the trees layer here in the image. But where a layer mask is black, it hides the corresponding part of the image to which it's attached. So I'm going to add some black paint to this layer mask to hide parts of the trees image, and where those parts are hidden on the trees layer, we'll be able to see down through to the orange layer below. Before I add any paint, I want to make sure that I have the layer mask thumbnail selected in the layers panel. I don't want to have the image thumbnail selected like this. When the layer mask thumbnail is selected, it has this thin black border around it.
So imagine trying
Then
to
I'll go
read
over to the
that instead of watching that. It's a very different experience, and that's why computer books are just not nearly as effective as learning on the computer, on the video. And here's an example of something that's more skills-oriented and theory-oriented.
Alrighty, let's recap. You can speed up and slow down shutter speed to let more or less light to the image sensor. And you can open and close the aperture to let more or less light to the image sensor. Shutter speeds are measured in fractions of a second, while apertures are measured in ratios called f-stops. Together, these two numbers, shutter speed and aperture size, comprise an exposure setting. A faster shutter speed allows less light to pass to the image sensor, as does a smaller aperture. Now, believe it or not, if you're clear on this, you already understand the fundamental components of basic exposure. Really, this is it.
And this is more of a project-oriented class to teach how to make a portfolio using Flash.
I'm going to be really walking you through all of the ins and outs of how to create a robust, flexible portfolio website in Flash from the ground up. I'll show you how to incorporate good web design principles, how to create a user-friendly site, including dynamic navigation, eye-catching transitions, multiple content sections.
And then this is an excerpt from one of our documentaries.
Baja California, Mexico. And I came into a family of all doctors and academia people. You know, my mom was a teacher and my dad's a teacher, and he was a professor, an anatomy professor, and my dad would be giving us anatomy lessons when we were like 9, 7, 5 years of age, and he would give us 25 cents each if we knew the parts of the cranium. And I was just not paying attention. I was just off doodling with crayons and markers on on the floor or on the wall, because I just had no interest whatsoever in medicine. So although I didn't start in animation, I kind of...
So she's created the very first Nickelodeon TV show that has a female heroine for the Hispanic market. So we just hear constantly in the Twitter sphere and people telling us how much they're getting out of the videos and thanking us for creating this service. And just yesterday I was here for the animation session, and I got an email from somebody who I met yesterday. Dear Lynda, it was a highlight of my day to meet you yesterday and see the same spark in your eyes for Evergreen that I share myself. I've often wondered if I'd romanticized my time at Evergreen, but after yesterday it was quite validating to see you and so many others share this sentiment. And I feel, let's see, I want to thank you for being so open to my proposal for my startup, and most importantly, express my gratitude for the incredible company and powerful impact that it has had on my life. I launched my startup one-pager attached for under $1,500, partially because I could use Lynda.com to help me learn all the skills I needed in order to launch a company. You are changing lives, and I'm one of them. Thank you. So hearing stuff like that is pretty powerful, and these are just some tweets that there are thousands of them, and just the gratitude that people feel when you're actually helping them learn at their own speed and they're in their own way exactly what they want to learn in a very personalized way. And this was a very cute little video that a 9-year-old posted on YouTube about Lynda.com. This is about 4 years old.
He's trying to steer clear of the really big websites like Google and stuff like that. This is kind of a bigger website, but it's bigger than Purple definitely, but it's not as big as Google. And this is a really good website.
He was talking about how big websites are bad.
Anybody who does any creative work on the computers. It's called Lynda.com. Lynda.com. Put it right down there. Lynda.com. And basically what it is a bunch of video tutorials, like for Adobe CS3, every application.
So, you know, we hear from grandparents, from little kids, from college students, from teachers, from all kinds of walks of life about how powerful it is to have information that's outside of the classroom. And so I think really the question that we should all be asking ourselves is what is best done online and what is best done in the physical world. And of course, I've written some of the incredible positives of what online media can offer in for education. But I think some of the cons is that it doesn't offer this. And when you look at this specific list, this is Evergreen, right? This is what we were all so fortunate to get. My nephew, who is going to be starting here, was absolutely blown away that a teacher would write to him to say that he was excited to meet him and wanted to recommend something that he could study over the summer. And he's never actually had a teacher reach out to him to do that. And just the importance, especially in an increasingly mechanized, mechanical, automated world that we live in, the importance of human touch and all of these skills. And I am an Evergreen graduate, and I'm a business owner, but I'm also an employer. And I can tell you that when we employed 160 people last year, and it's very disheartening to interview people and realize that they don't have the social skills. They don't know how to do teamwork. They don't know how to present their ideas. They don't know how to exercise critical thinking and judgment, and the importance of that. And that's, to me, what Evergreen represents and why I feel so fortunate that I got to have this background. But I realize no matter how affordable Evergreen is, no matter how many students you open it up to, not everybody in the world is going to be lucky enough to get to go here. And I think a lot of what I've expressed today, just represents that we're really talking about blending online with physical. We're not talking about one taking over the other or one or the other. And that those very things that Evergreen stands for are so valuable. Let's not diminish it. Let's not gloss over it. Let's not give up on coordinated studies. We really have something that started, a movement that started way before the flipped classroom, and we should be loud and proud about it. So I want to thank you and take any questions. Thanks. Do we have time? Okay, sure.
Thank you so much, Lynda. So now we'd like to, as you've probably noticed on your tables, you've got some note cards and pens. So we've got about 10 minutes to take any of your questions. If you scribble down your question as quick as you can, we've got some volunteers.
Or you can just raise your hand and I'll repeat the question if you want. Yes. Great question. Have any of our videos been translated into other languages? Not yet. And part of the challenge with teaching technology is that it isn't just a straight language translation. There are actually different keyboards in different countries and different terminology for different types of functions, and sometimes even different features within the software in different countries. So it's a much bigger task, but it's on our radar. It's definitely within our plans, and thank you for asking. Yes. Great question. So is the next step for Lynda.com to incorporate collaboration and invite interactivity, because we are basically broadcasting this education, and yes, you have the choice to find exactly what you want to learn and go to the exact thing and have it be personal, but you don't have the opportunity for anybody to talk back to you. And that's one of the things that we don't feel is really that great in the online space just yet. We have a lot of ideas about how to do it in the future. It's not on our current roadmap. One of the interesting things is that Lynda.com has adopted quite a bit within education. So we actually team up with universities. It's offered at Evergreen, has been for many years, and all kinds of other colleges, MIT, Harvard, Yale, a lot of the colleges that I put up on my list, as well as many community colleges. I mean, it's really kind of been unbelievable how it's been adopted in education as an augmentation to, as a blended augment to, textbooks and classroom learning. So I think, personally, that I think we're still in the Stone Ages of collaboration online. I don't think that's personally where online shines at this moment, but it's on our radar too. It's probably not what we're going to get to right away. Yes? Yeah, great question about the digital divide, and is it only for people who own computers and for just first world countries? And actually, it's quite amazing, but I think it's going to be mobile and tablets that's going to get online out to the rest of the world way faster than computers. I do think there's a much bigger digital divide between owning a computer versus owning a mobile phone. And Lynda.com is available on mobile, Khan Academy, a lot of you watch the kids with their iPods. And so I do think that the actual owning of the device is not going to be the barrier. There's a lot of free online training. Ours is not free, but it's very, very affordable. Probably not affordable as affordable as it could be for a third world country, and that's not an area that we've personally invested much thinking towards just yet. But there is fantastic access, and it's actually increasing all the time. I do not see it diminishing. I see it increasing, and it's a great question. Other questions? Yes. It's a great question, and I'll just paraphrase it really quickly, that she's an instructional designer, and she still believes in the value of face-to-face learning, but she's getting a lot of pressure to put everything online. And do I have any examples of how online is being used with face-to-face? And I think the classroom video that I showed is very compelling, and also the TED Talk from Saul Khan is very compelling. And one of the things that we are planning to add to Lynda.com this year is an education channel where we're going to be showcasing how teachers are changing education for the better, and either blending online, it doesn't really matter whether it's online or in person, but just showing different examples of what is actually eliciting true knowledge and true learning versus test taking and teaching to the test. So that's going to be really exciting. Yes? It's okay. I heard his question. I'm going to paraphrase it. Thank you. Okay, well, I completely agree with you, and sometimes I'm guilty of it myself. I text constantly, and I'm often in meetings, and I'm juggling a lot of things. I think it can definitely impair your attention. So this is just to paraphrase, he's asking my opinion about texting and whether somebody can both text and retain a presentation. And my answer is, I don't think so. I think as soon as you're reading an email or you're texting something, and it's being proven all over the place, people walking into sinkholes because they're looking at their cell phone, or, you're hearing about it. It was just made illegal in New York to, text and walk or something, I think I just read. And I think there's a lot of truth to it. And I definitely think that There's a lot of addictive behavior around computer and media. And so, again, my point, it can't all be that. We have to counterbalance it with actually engaging people in real engagement, real discussion, real high touch, really talking to each other. And often, I think, when you're on stage, you may not be interesting to everybody. And that's, to me, valid. And I think, you know, if you choose to not listen to somebody, that is, you know, going to happen. There's really no stopping it. She wasn't interested. Okay? Well, yeah, okay. I get your point completely. Yes.
Twice during your presentation, I wanted to bring more people in the room. So I tweeted while you were speaking on topic. And I felt like we were in dialogue, as well as any number of people who wanted to be here had they known about the opportunity. So that opportunity also exists within the same thing that keeps some people away from interacting. It so broadens the conversation that I appreciate the work you're doing. Now, you know, school librarians are sitting at the table saying, how do we blend in to our school structure? So I recognize the dilemma, but I also appreciate the opportunity.
I think that's a great flip side. It obviously wasn't relevant in the example that he described, but absolutely, it's a great, you know, this is another vehicle to be all-inclusive. Electronic distribution is far more reaching than physical one-on-one. There are only a finite number of people who could be here at this talk. If we publish this talk online, literally millions of people could see this talk. So there's just no arguing that it's got hugely positive potential to it. Yes?
I'm a public school teacher in a high school, and veered away or backed up from the idea of assessments and standardized tests that are obviously the up-and-comers in education. Have you thought about, been active, have any suggestions for how educators can navigate between?
It's a great question. So the question is that as Lynda.com as a company, we don't do assessments. So, you know, we kind of get off easy because we're not high school, we're not college, we're not giving a degree, we're not making any kind of promise. People can voluntarily decide to be a member or not be a member. That is their choice. But have I personally given any thought to how to change assessment away from the standardized multiple choice? And yes, I've given it a great amount of thought. And I think a huge part of it is what we do here again at Evergreen. I think when a student walks out of school with a true portfolio and they can show this is what I did versus this is the grade that I got, that is hugely helpful. And I think there are many different ways to assess. Of course, it becomes more subjective. It's less mechanized. It's less automated. And it's more personal. And you can also judge something where if somebody improved, if you're looking at a student who maybe has some sort of learning impairment, yet they have worked their hearts out and really come a long way versus somebody who's brilliant and could ace a test way beyond them, and you're going to call one person, you know, good at what they did and the other one not. There's real danger in that. So I think definitely basing it on actual performance and not so much on a standardized way of measurement. And I think really expanding our ideas and getting away from this idea that education should be mechanized, which is really, when you think about what we've done, we've just tried to make it almost like a factory instead of really thinking about how can it be you know, more honest. But I know of a few different techniques. There's also the technique of peer-to-peer grading, which is very powerful. And we had Mike Wesch, who was the teacher who created whose students created that early video that I showed with them all holding up the laptops. He has all of his students actually grade each other, which I think is a really interesting technique. And it's so important to be self-critical. This is something that we were talking about, the alums who I'm traveling with, about how I'll just tell one more little story and then I think we're going to have to close. But I was a commencement speaker at Brooks College of Brooks Institute, which is a photography college. And before me, one of the student speakers came on, and she gave a talk, and she said, I came to the school and, I worked my heart out on my first assignment. I stayed up till 3 in the morning. I showed it to the group and they just absolutely ripped it apart. And I came home and I was crying and I was like, this is so unfair. I've never worked as hard on anything as I worked on this thing. And now 4 years later, I'm graduating and I'm so glad that they criticized that. Because what I'm trying to aspire to be is a professional photographer, and I really need to know how my work compares to professionals, not how hard I worked on it. And I thought that that was so valuable, and I think that's what a lot of us at Evergreen come away with too. Matt was telling great stories yesterday about some of his evaluations and some of just the really profound statements that were said when you have a face-to-face with someone and you understand, this person is that they are who they are. They are not just a number and they should be like everybody else. And I think the entire premise of Summerhill, the entire premise of Evergreen is that we're all different and that we all have certain strengths, certain interests, certain passions, and the idea is not for us to all be the same. The idea is for us to shine at who we are and find our purpose and find our passion. And I feel incredibly grateful that I've been able to achieve that in my life, and so sad that so many other people don't even know to do that. And so I think I probably have to close because I think we're running out of time, but I just want to thank you all for attending, and it's been a pleasure to be here to get to speak today. An honor. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.